Hello and welcome back to Dashing Swordsman Painting. Today we're painting the M8 Greyhound Scout Car. This is a 28mm 3D printed model, another one for the Bolt Action US Airborne Army for the European theater. This sculpt is a great free STL from ANerdsNerd on Cults 3D. I'll put a link in the description below. We'll start with the primer. I'm using an olive green primer through an airbrush. Make sure you give it a good thorough coverage all around and include any of the recessed details. Just make sure your paint has a good place to stick. Next, we're going to base coat the whole model with a coat of US Olive Drab from Vallejo. I think it's a close enough historical color, and most importantly, it'll match the rest of the vehicles for the Army. For today's recommendation, I would like to recommend the NPR American Chronicles on World War II. I listened to the audiobook from my library. It was a really quick listen, only about 3 hours, and it was made up of a bunch of incredible interviews and perspectives and recordings from the World War II period and afterward, strung together with narratives from the NPR staff. I would highly recommend it as a listen. It was really well done. Next, we'll base coat the metals on the gun parts and some of the details using German gray from Vallejo. I like German gray because it looks black on first appearance, but takes a dark wash well enough to give some good visual contrast. Really the only thing on this model is the top-mounted machine gun, so I'll get both the gun action barrel and I'll leave the ammo box as olive drab. Next, to bring out some of the highlights from the very dark metal base coat and sell the fact that they do see a lot of use, we'll use a gentle dry brush of lead belcher or whatever your metallic of choice is. Next, I'll paint the rubber tires on the wheels using dark rubber from Vallejo. Next, we'll get the decals ready. I'm going to cut each decal that I want to use out of its sheet and make sure that the size and position are right on the model. I like to set the decal on top of a soaked paper towel and then put a couple extra drops of water on top. That'll make sure the moisture gets all the way through and into the backing paper of the decal, and then I'm not worried about a little tiny decal floating away in a bowl. Then to apply the decals, I start with painting the section of the model pretty generously with micro set. This will help the decal slide around a little and get into position. Then I'll take the decal and a wet brush and gently slide it off of the backing paper and onto the prepared section. Patience is key here. Then, using the brush and some micro set to get the decal into position and shape it into the creases and grooves if you need to. Once it's in position, use your brush to absorb any extra liquid so the decal doesn't accidentally slide out of position. And lastly, apply a little bit of micro sol over the top of the decal to help soften it up and reduce the visual difference between the decal and the paint underneath it. My next stage was a dark brown wash all over the model. Unfortunately, I don't have the footage of applying the oil wash here, but you can see the brown effects of that in some of the creases and the down-facing areas and the color effect on top of the decals. It's important to do this after you apply your decals if you want them to show the effects of the weathering. Here, to sell even more weathering, I'll be using a sponge chipping method. I'm using German gray again for this because I had it close to hand, but any dark gray or dark brown would work great. Next, we're going to apply it by getting a little bit of paint onto a ripped off little section of sponge, and then we're going to dab off most of the paint onto a dry surface until it just barely leaves behind little dots. Then we're going to tap the sponge against the parts of the vehicle where you want your chipping. I like to try and imagine the spots that would realistically get paint damage: the running boards, tops of the doors, in the back where the guys are jumping on it, fenders behind the wheel, all that sort of thing. And with that, I decided to call it good for this vehicle. I think it turned out pretty well and helped recon the battlefields of Northwest Europe. Interestingly, I also learned while researching this model that the M8 Greyhound models are still in use in some places in the world by several countries. Once again, thanks again so much for joining another Dashing Swords and Painting. Feel free to check out the Instagram for any pictures and videos of painting projects. Let me know what you'd like to see in the future. Good luck and have fun painting.